Hey, Weekly Pulse on all things green and gold with the three-time Wisconsin Sportswriter of the Year. It is another edition, the bye-week edition of Weekly Wilde. I'm Alex Strouf with you from the Gruber Law Offices, One Call That's All Studio, downtown Milwaukee. That is Jason Wilde in his office/basement in my hometown, the lovely Green Bay, Wisconsin. Jason, happy bye week. You're actually not doing Wilde and Tausch Thursday and Friday, but you still made time for me. Any reason why that is?
Yeah, I didn't send out one of those emails, right? Out of I did Jen, Gabe, and Chewy. It is a source of some consternation in my house that I don't take days off.
Mm-hmm.
The 3-hour block that our show is, that will allow me to take Maddie to her rehab for her knee and do some other stuff. But again, you've heard me say this a million times, right? I mean, you grew up, your mom was a teacher, your dad a cop. Like, my dad worked in a factory for 40 years. What we get to do for a living ain't work. Like, sometimes it feels like work, but we're really lucky. So if it means me spending part of my morning with you instead of painting Sid's room, they got
welcome.
They got plenty of painters up there. This is a win for me.
Well, you're welcome to get you away for a half an hour, but do appreciate you doing it despite obviously having a bye week of sorts of your own. So let's start with the trade deadline, which obviously came and went on Tuesday. News has kind of evolved since the trading of Preston Smith, who was sent to Pittsburgh for a 7th-round pick. He met with Pittsburgh media Wednesday afternoon saying he requested a trade because he felt as if he didn't really fit as well in this base defense, right? Went back to the old 3-4. Where he can be on the outside in Pittsburgh rather than have a hand in the ground, essentially, here in Green Bay. So I was surprised to learn he had requested a trade, though, Jason. Been with the team since 2019. What do you make of that portion of the news and then the trade overall?
Yeah, I thought that was a piece that caught me by surprise as well. Now, I do think it's important to appreciate that he had history with Joe Barry. Right. He had played for Joe Barry in Washington early in his career because and here's why it's interesting, because, I wrote that story for last Sunday leading into the Lions game about Jeff Hafley. And I talked to, I think, 12 players. Preston was not one of them. Now, that wasn't because he was I knew he was unhappy and I didn't want him to get, frankly, I wish I had. And I wish he would have said something. But, he's only in the locker room to play that stupid game that these guys play, that they do this weird thing where
the up down side thing.
And it's really loud, which is less than ideal for them listening to your audio back. But I guess what I'm saying is that I didn't know that he was unhappy. I mean, he's frankly more like a 4-3 defensive end then he looks like a 3-4 outside linebacker, right? Like he is not a live, sleek edge rusher. He is a big dude. And so to learn that from Brooke Pryor, the Rob Domofsky of Pittsburgh, was surprising to me. Now, I would also add this. I just called up my State Journal story here because Goody was asked if it made sense to trade away the guy that asked it in a much longer form because it was me, to trade away a player who is a locker room leader. And even if he was starting to move down the pecking order, you could lose 2 guys to injury. And even Goody said this subsequently. He's like, yeah, you lose a couple of guys and suddenly you're saying, hey, maybe this wasn't such a good idea, which I thought was really nice to have that candor. But I asked him, if it made sense to not have him at all on your roster now. And I compared it to the Rasul Douglas trade because Rasul, they were 3-6.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what revisionist history people want to make, because they won 6 of their last 8, they were the trade deadline not going anywhere. And with Jair Alexander's injury issues that season, even before the suspension, they very much could have still used Rasul Douglas on their team. But they didn't think that they necessarily could utilize him, so they traded him, but they were rebuilding. In this case, this is a guy who they were still playing, not as much. But his answer, I thought, this is what threw me now that we know subsequently the other information. It wasn't something that we set out to do. It wasn't something that we called a bunch of teams saying, hey, are you interested in Preston Smith? Because we know his value. But when the opportunity came and we got the phone call, we just thought it made sense for us. Well, wait a minute. You got the phone call. It wasn't out of the blue. He told you he wanted to be traded. So I thought that was a little bit curious, and I'm a little bit confused by that. So again, is it a major thing? No, but it is. I think they're happy to have traded him either way, but the request obviously accelerated that.
So before I do want to dive deeper into the Smith trade overall, but I want to go back to Goody for a second because I don't know if a lot of fans limited your availability is with him, right? He hosts an annual press conference at the trade deadline. You talked to him a couple times around the draft. I think you talked to him on roster cut down day. Am I missing any end of season?
Well, we used to talk to him every week during training camp.
Okay.
And then they stopped doing that this year, which pissed me off. Because again, you know, and I understand it's a different era, but I'm from an era where I would call Ron Wolf's office almost every day. And nervously, because early in my career, I didn't want to screw it up. And if you had a faulty premise with your first question, and you had subsequent questions that were based off what you were expecting as an answer, you might get an answer that you weren't expecting, and then you're panicking. I can attest to that for sure. But I would call, Jeannie Bruette would answer the phone. Ron's on a call right now, or Ron's traveling, but he'll get back to you. Never, and Pro Football Hall of Famer, remember, never failed to get back to me. Also never lied to me. And so I feel like the general manager, especially for a team that is publicly owned, that they love to talk about, should be more forward-facing. His amount of availability is slightly, but only slightly greater than Ted Thompson's. And we all complained about Ted Thompson being a recluse, but Goody's not exactly, we see him more often, and he says hello to us, but from a journalistic perspective, he's not significantly more helpful. And I thought, you know, again, this Preston Smith part notwithstanding, I thought that what he did on Tuesday was really helpful for fans, right? Like, these are the things that fans, and again, I take it seriously that I'm the conduit. I need to be able to ask the questions, not just for me, but for them. And if you're not available as often, then I don't get to ask as many questions, and fans are less well-informed. And that's not just platitudes and Pollyanna. That's how I really feel.
No, and I think you live up to it, because I think what you and you mentioned Rob Domofsky before, right? You're the two guys I talk to the most that are there every day. You know, I, as a fan of the team, I appreciate the stuff you guys do. So when it comes to Goody, I just always feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm going to be talking about you here. I feel like you oftentimes, when you speak with Goody, walk away with more questions or more doubts, or, you know, I don't know that you always walk away with the closure maybe you're searching for when you talk to him.
Very fair.
Which is very interesting to me, you know, since he took over as the GM in 2018.
Yeah, that's very fair. It is. And again, you know, I can only ask so many questions, right? Like I do have colleagues that I would argue probably dominate the proceedings more than they should. I try not to do that. Obviously, LaFleur and I on Monday had a pretty lengthy back and forth about the interceptions, but I thought it was insightful and helpful. So I can only ask so much, and I try to be thoughtful of other people's time. But yes, I always leave those with, well, I wonder with this. And now I've got one like 2 days later because of what Preston Smith said.
Yeah, me too. So let's go back to Preston Smith, Jason, because I think that is it's reminiscent of the Rasul Douglas trade from a year ago, as you referenced before. You know, one of your veteran starters on your defense. It allows for some of the younger guys like the Brenton Cox Jr.'s, the Aaron Mosby's, the Lucas Van Ness's to get on the field more. But I can't walk away from Tuesday's deadline as a fan thinking, yeah, we got better today.
Yeah, that's fair. Although Preston Smith, his name and him being traded feels different than if his name was Preston Strouf and you didn't really, he didn't have 90. Like, look, the guy's been a really good Packer, not a great Packer, but a really good Packer, right?
Good, yeah.
Part of a crucial free agent class that Goody signed in 19, the only one that's still here. Guy that was not a malcontent, did not, in my opinion, fake an injury because he was unhappy and didn't have more guaranteed money left in his contract. Like, he was a good player and a good locker room guy and well respected. Always, I mean, he missed one game, I believe, in his career in Green Bay. So I'm not downgrading him at all. But at this point, I mean, in the last 4 games, he had 0 sacks and 2 pressures. And while his playing time had been curtailed, it certainly had cratered to next to nothing. Like, Aaron Mosby's played 7 defensive snaps this year. And at the time of his sack, he was playing his 3rd. So, the name Preston Smith getting traded, I think it's very fair to feel that way as a Packers fan. The production of Preston Smith getting traded, I think you can shrug and say, all right, Aaron Mosby can be that guy. Or, and I like Lucas Van Ness, Hercules, but I really, if there's a guy on the roster that's been disappointing to me, it's probably him, just because I have been shampooed and conditioned in this idea that year 2 is the big jump year for every year 1 to year 2. And I haven't seen that jump from him. And so I don't know why that is. Is he struggling with the transition to a 4-3? Is he being misused? Or was he not a very good draft pick? Because Will McDonald, who went 15th to the Jets in that Packers pick swap with them, has been pretty damn productive for the Jets. One of the few things that have gone right for the Jets for much of this season. So again, Preston, I agree. I don't think better by any means. I totally agree with that. Does it make them worse? Again, I'll quote Goody and say, yeah, you're a couple injuries away from going, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And I appreciated him being honest about that. But do I think they're going to regret this? No. Do I think, I was joking about this with Domofsky as we were getting ready for the trade deadline. Do you think they can reacquire Rasul Douglas? I mean, I don't know how he's playing in Buffalo. I haven't watched a ton of Buffalo games, but I think he's playing pretty well. That's a position they could have used some help. And that's a guy that obviously was a pretty damn good football player for him when he was here.
Yeah, I mean, to use your term, as a Packers fan, I have been shampooed and conditioned to not expect much at the trade deadline. I mean, I can't think of a time they've acquired a player at the deadline. What am I missing?
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to go back and look. And by rinse and repeat. That's my way of doing rinse and repeat instead.
Yeah.
I was trying to be clever. I don't know if it landed or not. Especially since I haven't showered yet. But
thanks for that information. Yeah.
Well, it's not a scratch and sniff show. It's like we're not even in the same room. Like, and I don't think I smell that bad. I did shower yesterday. But I do think that, there's been some situations where we thought something was going to happen. They were certainly in some trade talks at different times during the trade deadline. Again, I go back to the Chase Claypool, and I always, in college, I actually really liked Garth Brooks. It was the one country artist that I really enjoyed.
Did you have friends in low places or what? That's Garth Brooks.
I got friends. That's not the song I was thinking of. I was thinking of some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers.
Wow.
And that was an unanswered trade, right? I mean, that you would have squandered a 2nd-round pick on a guy who's not very good, and you might not have Jaden Reed on your team, frankly. So again, I don't think it's a big deal that they didn't add, but you're right. Like, there was the year that they were in on him. There was the defensive tackle Tomlinson that they were trying to acquire, I think, from the Giants. Then he ended up with the Vikings as a free agent a year later. Like, there were some guys they were in on that probably could have helped them. I don't have to watch. And Pat McAfee, for what he does a great job. I am not his brotastic target audience, and that's fine. But I do like the fact that I don't have to worry about what Aaron Rodgers says anymore, as opposed to before when I did. And frankly, hey, I get it. For 4 years, I did a show that every other beat writer had to listen to because he was going to say something interesting, right? But he did say that there were some times where he felt like maybe they could have acquired someone or would have put him over the top. But then he used Marshawn Lynch as the example.
Lynch,
And 2010, they won a title without acquiring Marshawn Lynch. That was the year that he was available at the trade deadline. And the next year they went 15-1. So not sure they really needed Marshawn Lynch in those instances. So there were maybe some other ones that he could have used as an example. The bottom line is, the trade deadline has also evolved, in fairness to Ted, RIP. For most of my career, the trade deadline was a complete nothing burger for everyone, not just for Ted Thompson.
Yeah, and that is obviously no longer the way it is. So we will see in the coming years if Goody maybe changes his philosophy on it. But so far, he's been a seller at the deadline much more than he's been a buyer. And I don't know that the Packers have really ever acquired anybody at the deadline. To go back to your point on Marshawn Lynch, the Packers did acquire a running back by trade in 2010. It was before the season. Ended up being a pretty good player for them. His name's Ryan Grant. So that worked out. Was that 2009 or 10 they traded for him?
They traded for him in 2007.
It was that early.
Yes. And they lost him to an injury in the opener in Philly. 6th round pick that nobody knew who the hell he was, played at the University of Buffalo, comes in off of the PUP list and has a huge impact. And that, of course, was James Starks. So, again, that was kind of their trade deadline pickup. Guy coming off a rookie 6th round pick coming off PUP, helping them win a Super Bowl. But that kind of defies the Ted Thompson era, frankly.
Sounds like their roster spot will go to Marshawn Lloyd, correct?
I would think either him or the former 1st round pick Jamin Davis, Jamin, whatever. I haven't talked to him yet. We're not allowed to talk to practice squad guys, which I don't like that rule either. But that's another discussion for another podcast. But I don't like 1st round pick. Tausch always says 1st round picks constantly have to prove that they don't belong in the league, and 7th round picks like him constantly had to prove that they did belong in the league. That's a guy that could, maybe he helps them too. So that's another possibility.
There you go. All right. We got about 15 minutes left. Let's get to 4 Downs, the mid-season edition of 4 Downs as the Packers enter their bye week. They are 6-3 on the year. 3 games above 500 is not 3 losses, coming against pretty good NFC teams, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Detroit Lions, of course. Last week, 1st down. Jason, as it stands through 9 weeks, where do you think the Packers stand in terms of the hierarchy in the NFC?
Yeah, great question, because I think it's going to change, right? And I think if you look at last season, if you had asked me this question had this show existed, toward the bottom would have been the answer, right? And then they win 6 out of their last 8. Look, I feel like the 49ers have obviously, what does Homer say, fiddling and diddling, with all their injuries and everything else. That would be a game and a team that would make me nervous even without Brandon Ayuk. I think we've seen that the Lions were not just some sort of flash in the pan last year, that keeping Ben Johnson as their offensive coordinator was a huge thing to have, because does Jared Goff even throw incompletions? Certainly not in Amon-Ra St. Brown's direction.
No. Wow. Unbelievable what he's doing.
Right. He may not be a Hall of Fame player, but the way he manages and makes the plays that he's expected to make and doesn't make a ton of mistakes, that's a pretty good sign. So those ones jump out. But I'll be honest, I thought the Cowboys were going to be better. Didn't expect the Washington Commanders to be good right away. Even though I'm a Dan Quinn fan and a good friend of mine is his defensive coordinator, Joe Witt. So I don't know. I felt like going into the Lions game that I would have put the Packers in the number 2 spot, that moment in the conference. But, it looks like Philly's maybe figuring things out. They've obviously had some issues there. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how things play out over the final 8 games for them. I do think this, if they can't go to Detroit and to Minnesota and win, which is what they did last year during the second half of the season, then they're clearly not going to win the division. And if they don't win the division, that means you're on the road for the entirety of the playoffs. And while it's great that they beat the Cowboys and had the 49ers on the ropes, and while it's great that the 2010 team won a Super Bowl, never playing at home, that is still really hard. And the deck will then be stacked against them if that's the scenario.
So your answer, probably what, 5th or 6th?
Probably 4th-ish.
Okay.
Move them up or down a spot.
Yeah, I mean, we're only 9 games in, and obviously that's fluid. That'll change in the coming weeks, right? If they beat San Francisco on the 24th, I imagine that might change your answer. So we will see as they return from their bye next week to go to Chicago. Second down, let's start with Jordan Love in terms of player evaluation here at this point in the season. Still leads the league in interceptions, missed 2 games, but he's been good, I think. Good, is that the right word to describe Jordan Love?
Yeah, he's been good. Yeah, he's been good. He has. But here's the thing, and again, he's not a second-year player. He is a second-year starter, so that this is a little bit of a different paradigm. But I think the year 1 to year 2 expectation still applies. Now, you know this as well as anyone because we had this conversation at Summerfest. We had it on Mr. Irrelevant during the offseason. Like, you and I have had this conversation a lot that with the NFL having 19 games of film on him, I expected them to spend the offseason, if they had the Packers on their schedule, working through, okay, here's the things we can do against this guy. And it would appear that blitzing him is fairly high on the list for defensive coordinators because it's worked. And so, and sometimes he's chucked the ball up like a Daniel Whelan punt, and Romeo Dobbs has come down pylon for a touchdown, right? When a 0 blitz was sent at him. But the bottom line is he has, for some people, he has been, we're leaving at like 9:10. Your appointment's at 9:30. Okay. Well, just hang out. We'll go in a minute. Physical therapy appointment with Maddie. So he has struggled, I would say, slightly more and made more mistakes in terms of interceptions than I expected him to. But I also think he's made a heck of a lot of plays. So I don't think we can just look at him and go, oh, he's what a regression in year 2. I don't see that. And I referenced the back and forth I had with Matt LaFleur on Monday. I think the crux of that, which by the way, pat on the back for me, which I don't like to do, but I'm glad we got Matt LaFleur to basically say, in a lot of words, like I do, that he needs to be more aware of situations when he takes risks. I love his talent. I love his arm strength. I love his aggressiveness. But there are times, just throw the damn ball out of bounds. And that has been the issue. And I appreciate Matt LaFleur basically finally saying, look, I think he's going to be better as the season goes on. I'm not worried. I don't think he's suddenly now a pedestrian quarterback. But he's got to be better than he's been if they're going to get to where they want to go.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. He's a good quarterback. There's no doubt about it. But certainly some mistakes this year that hopefully he can clean up in the second half like he did a year ago when the Packers went on that really impressive run. Let's go to third down. What do you know about Jeff Hafley's defense at this point? Obviously, there was a lot of hype in the preseason with the hire. They've done some really good things in terms of turnovers. They've also struggled to rush the opposing quarterback. So what do you know about Jeff Hafley's defense through 9 games in the regular season?
Yeah, I don't want to be as big of a Jeff Hafley stan as my lovely counterpart Tausch is of a Goody stan. So I don't want to make excuses for him. It's his job to be more productive. No doubt about it. That defense to be more productive in the pass rush. But if there's one area that I have been, if I was a Packers fan, the area that I would be most disappointed in is the defensive line. The level of investment there. Now, I want to defend Devontae Wyatt briefly because Devontae Wyatt was off to a damn good start when he hurt his ankle.
Sure was. Yeah.
Right? And so he's working his way back. We'll see if he can having the impact he had early in the season after the bye. But I like Kenny Clark's one of my guys, man. But he has not been the player that he has been in other seasons. Is that the system? Is that him? Whatever it is, the bottom line is he has not had that impact. Rashawn Gary, we talked about this in previous weeks. I really wanted to talk to him when he was going through the struggles, and he wasn't in the locker room. I didn't get a chance. And then I did talk to him after the Texans game when he had a sack. They moved him around. And so the narrative of that went from this guy is struggling to this guy has struggled, but maybe this is the tipping point in his season. Well, now 2 weeks later, it hasn't been the tipping point in his season, right? He's back to kind of being just a guy. And at $96 million, you're not supposed to be that, right? We talked about Preston Smith earlier. We don't have to spend more time on that. Lucas Van Ness, I thought he would develop more like power to speed moves or speed to power moves. He would have more in his repertoire, but from where I'm sitting, and again, I'm not a defensive end expert, but doesn't look like he's added a lot to his toolbox, and the results are what the results are. So part has been disappointing. The place that I would defend Jeff Hafley on is he recognizes that they're not getting it done that way. And instead of just saying, hey, that's what we do, we're going to keep doing it till it works. He's done other things, right? The fire replacement zones, the simulated pressures, that stuff. He's not afraid to do things differently to make it work.
For fourth down, I'm going to ask you a very open-ended question, which I know you love, and we are on a clock. We've got about 6.5 minutes left, so do with this what you will. The evolution of Matt LaFleur, obviously from a brand new head coach, coaching a 4-time MVP in Aaron Rodgers, to taking over Jordan Love, winning a playoff game last year, to now a 6-3 start this season. Specifically this year, what are your takeaways on the head coach, Matt LaFleur?
Yeah, I think for one, he is undeniably proven that he's more than just a guy that Aaron Rodgers could walk all over, right? And first, by the way, I respect Matt LaFleur. I know, this makes him a beta or whatever it is in our masculine culture that we live in. But that's a hell of a lot harder than being a jerk and saying, F you, we're doing it my way. It takes a lot more strength and self-confidence and being secure in your manhood to let a guy like Aaron Rodgers have the sway that he did, because it's better for the team. It's not better for you, right? And so I even though I know that there are people that criticized him for it, I respected that. He recognized the guy's talent. He understood the situation. Didn't make sense for him to impose his will on a guy like Rodgers. Then he gets a guy like Love, who needs him to be a different type of coach, and he is that different type of coach. That there is more of a partnership there. And yet, he still, again, has the security to say, all right, I'm going to give Jordan a little more autonomy, right? He can change plays at the line of scrimmage. I'm not going to crush him if he passes up a check down to try and go downfield. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. And then you get the Malik Willis piece of this. Like, somebody asked me who the MVP was of the season, and yeah, Josh Jacobs, yeah, Xavier McKinney. How about Malik Willis? Without him, they might be sitting at 3-6, just like last year after 9 games. And the fact that Matt LaFleur has conjured up game plans that made this guy, who was never successful in Tennessee, successful. And let's not forget, Malik Willis deserves a bunch of credit. The throw to Jaden Reed in Jacksonville, some of the other plays he made, let's not underplay what he has done to improve himself since he got here. Mm-hmm. But I think those 3 different quarterback situations that he's dealt with, I think Matt LaFleur has proven that he knows what he's doing. And has he won the big one? No. Does he deserve to be held to that standard? Absolutely. But I think he's proven pretty conclusively that he's a damn good football coach. And now he's got to get to the next level like Sean McVay has. And, oh, by the way, Kyle Shanahan's been to Super Bowls. He hadn't won one. So he's not that far behind Kyle Shanahan, despite Kyle Shanahan's Super Bowl appearances.
Yeah, he's got to get there. And I don't know if this year will be the year, but it is a team that hopefully can trend in the correct direction and repeat what they did a year ago when they returned from their bye next week. That does it for us this week on Weekly Wilde. Jason Wilde on Twitter at Jason J. Wilde, at least for the time being. I'm at Twitter at Alex_Strouf. You can hear Jason weekdays 9 to noon on Wilde and Tausch. Jason, appreciate the time as always. Do it again next week.
Follow me on Threads. I don't know if I have an account. I need to probably spend a little more time on it.
I do too. I don't think I've posted since last July on Threads, but nonetheless. All right.
Hard to change your habits. All right, buddy. Thanks for doing it. Take care. Be good.